Strangers Hall in Norwich, England is a location that's steeped in a little known history of strangers or travelers that needed accommodation. It's also an example of how private homes were used for businesses in tandem with the residents that lived there. In order to find out who would have worked at this location, how that would have operated as a business and a home, I sat down with the director of the museum at Strangers Hall today, and here's what she had to say. Hello, Bethan. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, Cassidy. How are you?
I am doing very well, and I'm very excited to talk about Strangers Hall. We have never covered this yet on our show. And I wonder if you could tell us about the people that were the strangers that the hall is named after. Who were the refugees coming to England in the 16th century?
You know what? I wish I could give you a really straightforward answer to that. But as you know, everything in history is very complicated. So, first of all, Strangers Hall, the name Strangers Hall, we now tell the stories of strangers, which I'll go into in just a second. But we don't know for sure whether the hall was named after those refugees. The term strangers in early English, I suppose we could say, could be anybody who was from outside of your area. So, in the records of Norwich in particular, about which we're going to be speaking about this evening, um, basically, we have a reference to a stranger from the 13th century. He appears in the court records, and he's a stranger because he's outside of the medieval city walls. So he's seen as being somebody from outside of Norwich. So the term stranger meant anyone who was from outside of your locality. Where strangers in Norwich differ in particular is in 1565, the person who was living and owned Strangers Hall, Thomas Southerton, he invited some weaver families to Norwich to rejuvenate our flagging textile industry. It was in a really bad way. These weavers came from what we call the Low Countries, so Flanders, Holland, we have northern France, Walloons, but the original 30 families had actually settled elsewhere in the country before then. So we know that some of them were invited. They were all living in Sandwich, for example, or they were living in Canterbury. They came to Norwich, probably not all 30 who were originally invited. It was in 1567, so 2 years after those original 30 families came to Norwich, or almost 30 families came to Norwich, that we have a refugee crisis, for not even for want of a better term, it was a crisis. The Low Countries were being attacked by the Catholic Spanish, and they were Protestants, and it was religious persecution in the extreme. They would have been killed if they didn't have Roman Catholic artifacts in their homes. So they fled to Norwich, amongst other places. There was a significant number of that came. So I'm just going to quickly look this up. So I'll just have a little pause for you. Right. So there was a significant number who came. There were 1,800 incomers in 1567. And that is a population of Norwich that we believe to be 13,000. The reason we're not being too clear about that is because although they did a census of the strangers, because they became an identified group of people, they didn't have a census of the population. And that's because there was concern about such a large influx of people to the city. So the Strangers Hall could be called Strangers Hall because Thomas Southerton invited those first weaver families in 1565. However, the term was not used, written down until 1841. And there is a theory that it could relate to, by this time, it was being used as a Roman Catholic presbytery, and they could be the strangers. So I wish I could give you a really straight answer there, Cassidy, rather than a massive lengthy one. But that is the story, really, of Strangers Hall in a nutshell.
The history of Strangers Hall is well worth exploring if you're in the area of Norwich to find out more. So definitely stop in and explore the museum and see what they have going on there. You can also visit their website to learn a whole lot more, and I'll place the link to that below this video. We also have more on the history of Thomas Southerton, who first occupied the site, their history of working at Strangers Hall, and much more history packed into the bonus content for patrons of our show. And you can hear Beth Ann go into more detail on Strangers Hall in our conversation on the podcast. Listen to that at CassidyCash.com/episode 272. That's CassidyCash.com/EP272. While you're there, click on the Patreon button to support our show, and the bonus history, including images from Strangers Hall and other primary documents, are listed in the bonus content that will expand right on the website. That's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.